Екуменічний соціальний тиждень «Стійкість спільнот. Шлях до зцілення та відновлення країни».
Форум відбувається з ініціативи Інституту екуменічних студій Українського католицького університету у співпраці із фондом Конрада Аденауера в Україні та Євангелічною церквою Німеччини.
Свідчення стійкості в часі війни, реінтеграція громад та ветеранів, українські спільноти за кордоном, переслідування релігійних спільнот на тимчасово окупованих територіях. Ці та інші питання обговорять експерти з України та за кордону.
У рамках міжнародного форуму відбудуться круглі столи, панельні дискусії, семінари, виставки, майстер-класи. Запрошуємо молодь, активних громадян, студентів, освітян, журналістів, представників релігійних та громадських організацій до участі.
Реєстрація та деталі на сайті es.uku.edu.ua. Форум відбудеться у гібридному форматі – наживо та онлайн.
Glory to Jesus Christ. Dear participants, fathers, this is the final part within the framework of the 17th International Ecumenical Social Week. This will be the last panel for the day and for this year's social week. So we will start with the prayer to our defenders and to the fallen ones. This is a prayer to all those thanks to whom it is possible for us to gather together and to have these events. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. We will start with technical details. We use two languages for this event, Ukrainian and English, and we also have simultaneous interpretation available for those of you who have presentations. Be mindful of the fact that we also have interpreters working for us. That is why I will kindly ask you to pace yourself for them to do their job. Because the topic that we are raising is theological, but I hope that everything will be fine. In case there is an air raid alert, because this is the reality we are living in, we know that there are some threats already. In case there is an air raid alert, it depends on the situation. We will monitor it. If there are some strikes, we will have to go down to the basement to continue our session. If it is safe, then we will continue. In case there is an air raid alert, we will have a 10-minute break. The partners for this event, and actually this is a partner for the entire Ecumenical Social Week, this is the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Evangelische Kirche Deutschland is also a partner for the event. The partner for this event and the previous is CNEWA and L'Odorian French Foundation. We will use 15 minutes for each speaker. The first speaker is going to be Reverend Dr. Hyacinthe Destivelle, who is a very busy person, especially now when he is an expert at the synod dedicated to the topic of synodality. He always has his hands full. However, he has joined us online. We will listen to him to start with. Then we will have a Q&A session, and then we will hear from Reverend Dr. Ivan Datsko. We will have a short break, and then we have 3 more speakers: Reverend Ihor Shaban, Professor Volodymyr Bureha, and Dr. Anatoly Babensky. If you have any questions online, you can leave them in a chat box. We will receive these questions and I will read them out. I also would like to remind you that this is an event within a 3-year program on Eastern Catholics, the mission of unity and Catholicism. This year, this project is coming to its end. We will be having another conference in November, in mid-November in Vienna, and that will be the final EOA under the framework of the project. We will see whether we can continue. We have willingness to continue this project, but we will see how things turn out. We try our best. We already had a conference in Rome with the Institute. There was also another conference organized in Lviv. The topic for this panel is categories of particularity and universality in the light of the Compendium of the Bishop of Rome. This is a collection, this is a document the Bishop of Rome has been recently published by the Dicastery for promoting Christian unity. Dr. Hyacinthe played an instrumental role in publishing, and it is over to you, Reverend. Reverend Dr. Hyacinthe Destivelle is OP official of the Dicastery for promoting Christian unity at the Vatican. He is also the director of the Institute for Ecumenical Studies of Pontifical University. Yes, a twin institute for our university, and this is Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, and this is my alma mater, actually. I wanted to mention it. Over to you, Reverend. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Speak on the Eastern Catholic Church in the context of the relationship between primacy and conciliarity according to the document the Bishop of Rome. But first of all, I would like to apologize first to not being able to be with you today, and I will also leave very briefly after my speech because I have to go back to the synod where we have this afternoon a plenary session. And I am, as it has been said, I am involved as an expert in this synod. I have to coordinate the French-speaking group. So again, apologize. But nevertheless, I'm very delighted to be with you, even if it is online. And I will therefore dedicate this talk to the question of the Eastern Catholic Church, which is very also a topic very topical in the actual synod. Before turning to the question of the Eastern Catholic Churches in the document the Bishop of Rome, I would like to mention some of the fundamental insights of this document. The fundamental approach of this document, the Bishop of Rome, is to, I would say, to overcome some false oppositions. And the first false opposition concerns perhaps the relationship between primacy and synodality. Instead of conceiving this relationship dialectically as two concurrent principles to be kept in balance, the document, the Bishop of Rome, shows that it is much more fruitful from an ecclesiological point of view and more promising from ecumenical methodology to understand primacy as an integral part of synodality. A synodality understood as a dynamic articulation of the three dimensions: communal, collegial, and primatial. It is the whole of the three dimensions, so the one, the whole, the sum, that makes synodality. And from this perspective, primacy is part of synodality. Primacy is part of synodality. This is the first, I would say, the first intuition, or the first fruit, the first conclusion of this document. The second false opposition concerns the relationship between de jure divino and de jure humano. it is also a very important insight of this document. Instead of opposing these two approaches, the document, the Bishop of Rome, shows that it is more fruitful to emphasize the distinction between the theological content of primacy and the historical contingencies in which it manifests itself. In the 70s, Cardinal Ratzinger, after the Second Vatican Council, had already formulated a similar perspective when he stated that unitary ecclesial law, unitary liturgy, unitary allocation of episcopal sees by the Roman Center, all these are things that are not necessarily part of primacy as such, he said. So he was also distinguishing the essence and the contingencies. There are aspects of primacies which have to do with the contingent. If you want, the human aspect of primacy. And if the human dimension of primacy is better understood today, also we can say that the divine dimension of synodality is also better understood, because synodality is also part of the essence of the church. So we can say that also synodality is de jure divino, not only primacy, as said very often also the Metropolitan John Zizioulas, the former co-chair of the Catholic Orthodox Dialogue. In both cases, it is a matter of better distinguishing the theological essence from historical contingencies. So, first opposition, false opposition between primacy and synodality. Second, between de jure divino and de jure humano. The third false opposition concerns the relationship between primacy of honor and primacy of jurisdiction. The document, the Bishop of Rome, shows that in the first millennium, primacy of honor did not simply mean honorific precedence, but, I quote, the authority to take real decisions, as some dialogues have noted already, calling for this opposition to be overcome, considering that honor implies real responsibility and authority. As says, for example, the French Catholic Orthodox Dialogue, if the primate is indeed inter pares, it is not less truly primus. So a third opposition, primacy of honor, false opposition between primacy of honor and primacy of jurisdiction. The fourth false opposition concerns the relationship between the first and the second millenniums. Again, there is here a tendency to oppose these two periods. But drawing on recent dialogues, the document, the Bishop of Rome, notes that, I quote, in Orthodox Catholic dialogue, there is a strong tendency to idealize the first millennium, and that one cannot really speak of an undivided church in the first millennium. Moreover, should the united church be based on the recreation of ancient institutions without taking into account the development of the second millennium? And finally, even taking into account the first two millennia, shouldn't the churches on the way to full communion, first and foremost, respond to the challenge of today, those of the third millennium? So, another false opposition between the first and the second millennium. And finally, the fifth false opposition concerns the relationship between the local church and the universal church. As we know, while most of the Christian traditions emphasize the local realization of the Church, Catholic ecclesiology traditionally insists on the universal dimension. However, many dialogues have highlighted the fact that in most Christian communions, the regional level is the most relevant for the exercise of primacy. It is therefore necessary to link primacy in the whole Church with primacies in the churches at regional or supra-local level. Vatican II recognized that this regional dimension is rooted in divine will, affirming that divine providence has willed that the various churches established in different places by the apostles and their successors should, in the course of time, come together in several organically united groups in Lumen Gentium 23. The divine providence has willed, divina autem providentia factum est. And in line with and not only Lumen Gentium affirmed the providential establishment of regional church, but also it drew a parallel between episcopal conferences and the ancient patriarchates. And in line with this parallel, Joseph Ratzinger in the 60s wondered whether the Church of Asia and Africa, like those of the East, might not become the equivalent of patriarchates under this or other name, as he said, that may be given to these churches in the future. So, 5 false opposition overcome by this document between primacy and synodality, de jure divino and de jure humano, between primacy of honor and primacy of jurisdiction, between the first and the second millennia, and finally between the local church and the universal church. And it is precisely in the section that speaks of the regional level of the Church as the document the Bishop of Rome addresses the question of the Eastern Catholic Churches as a particular paradigm of the relationship between primacy and synodality. This regional perspective could be criticized, as we know that the Eastern Catholic Churches are churches spread throughout the world, are not just regional churches. However, this perspective is better understood if we take into account the desire of many ecumenical dialogues to value the regional level of the Church in order to move away from, again, the debate concerning the relationship between the local and the universal churches. For example, the North American Orthodox Catholic dialogue has raised the question of the relationship between primacy and primacies by stating that, I quote, in a reunited church, this understanding of papal and episcopal authority as complementary and mutually reinforcing should be broadened to include the more complex patterns of local, primatial, and patriarchal authority that have developed in the Eastern churches since patristic times. The same document of the North American Catholic Orthodox dialogue suggested that new structures of authority specifying concretely the relationships between local and regional primates should be instituted after consultation in common, perhaps by an ecumenical council. With regard to the Eastern churches, the same document of the North American dialogue further proposes that in a reconciled church, the relationship of the Bishop of Rome with the Eastern churches and their bishops should be fundamentally different from the relationship which is currently established in the Latin Church. And the same document adds that the present Eastern Catholic churches would have the same relationship with the Bishop of Rome as the present Orthodox churches. Pope John Paul II and Pope Shenouda III were able to agree on such a perspective in a joint document they signed in 1979. I quote, "The unity we envisage in no way means the absorption of one by the other or the domination of one over the other. It is at the service of each one to help each one to better live the gifts that he has received from the Spirit of God. Unity presupposes that our churches continue to have the right and the power to govern themselves according to their own traditions and disciplines." End of quote. In some respect, this 1979 document prefigured the document of Ballamant. The document the Bishop of Rome states that, I quote, "The Orthodox churches, fearing absorption and loss of power to govern themselves, regard the relationship between the Eastern Catholic churches and the See of Rome as a measure of the ecumenical credibility of the Catholic Church. They do not recognize the present relationship of the Eastern Catholic churches with Rome as a model for future communion." End of quote. The document points out that the Orthodox Catholic dialogue has enabled a deeper understanding of the Eastern Catholic churches from an ecclesiological point of view, a phenomenon closely linked to the question of primacy and synodality. As the document puts it, I quote, "In the 17th century, the basis for the establishment of the Eastern Catholic churches, rooted in post-Tridentine ecclesiology, was the claim of the direct jurisdiction of the Roman See over all the local churches. This implied that churches not in communion with the Roman See could be the object of missionary activity to bring them back into communion with the Catholic Church while allowing them to retain their own liturgy and discipline. End of quote. This explains why in the Roman Curia the Eastern Catholic churches were originally under the jurisdiction of the Propaganda Fide, responsible for missions. The International Orthodox Catholic Dialogue in the Balaman document declared that the ecumenical effort of the sister churches of East and West, founded in dialogue and prayer, seeks a perfect and total communion, which is neither absorption nor fusion, but encounter in truth and love. And in its latest document in Alexandria, the same commission acknowledges that, I quote, the motives for these unions of the Eastern Catholic churches have always been disputed. A sincere desire for the unity of the Church cannot be excluded from consideration. Religious and political factors have often been intertwined. Unions often appear to be attempts to escape from unfortunate local situations. The same recent document of the Catholic Orthodox Dialogue, though, in Alexandria, calls for a clearer distinction between the different responsibilities of the Bishop of Rome, in particular between his patriarchal ministry in the Church of the West and his primatial ministry of unity in the communion of the churches, both Western and Eastern. Somehow, the reinstatement in the Annuario Pontificio 2024 of the title Patriarch of the West among the Pope's historical titles could be an opportunity to reflect on this distinction. It would certainly also be necessary to distinguish the patriarchal and primatial roles of the Bishop of Rome from his political function as head of state. Finally, since the Pope's various responsibilities are based on his ministry as Bishop of Rome, the Church that presides in charity, according to Saint Ignatius of Antioch, it is also important to give greater emphasis to his episcopal ministry at the local level. In this respect, it is remarkable that Pope Francis insisted on his title of Bishop of Rome from the very first public words after his election, saying the 13th of March 2013 that, I quote, the task of the conclave was to give a bishop to Rome. And he continued, the diocesan community of Rome as its bishop. But what is perhaps most lacking is a model for re-establishing communion for the third millennium, and it will be my last point. As the document the Bishop of Rome explains, the Orthodox churches with whom the Catholic Church recognizes a common ecclesial order based on apostolic tradition and the sacraments do not recognize the current relationship of the Eastern Catholic churches with Rome as a model of communion acceptable to them. A future model of communion could be inspired by the well-known principle formulated by Cardinal Ratzinger that, I quote, with regard of the doctrine of primacy, Rome must not demand of the East more than has been formulated and lived during the first millennium. For his part, Pope Francis has confirmed that the restoration of full communion doesn't mean either submission to or absorption by one another, but rather the acceptance of all the gifts that God has given to each in order to manifest to the whole world the great mystery of salvation brought about by Christ the Lord through the Holy Spirit. It was his declaration in Constantinople in 2014. As the Dicastery for Promoting Christian Unity suggests in its final proposal at the end of the document the Bishop of Rome, this model of full communion could include two responsibilities relating to the ministry of unity of the Bishop of Rome. First, a specific role in ecumenical councils, such as convocation and presidency, and second, a role of mediation in the event of conflicts of a disciplinary or doctrinal nature through the synodal exercise of the procedure of appeals. It is undoubtedly, and it will be my conclusion, it is undoubtedly the vocation and the responsibility of the theologians and canon lawyers of the Eastern Catholic Churches to propose the concrete modalities of this new model of communion. Thank you.
Дуже дякую, отче.
Thank you, Father, for finding the time to be here with us. And thank you for a very general overview of this document about those complications which were overcome. And my personal reaction was to hear, well, what Cardinal Ratzinger said that well, the East should not be imposed on more than it was in the first millennium. I think it's a very important phrase which can be used to continue working. And I would like to remind our audience that the document we are working on right now is a conceptual response to those reactions which were received after the Hyacinthe encyclica of John Paul II, where he called upon other Christian churches to do so that, well, this papal canon serves for the unity of churches, and this is a huge conceptual document. 30 years have already passed since it was prepared, and Father Hyacinthe did a lot in this regard, and there's, well, this collection of answers and also the conceptual part. And as a moderator, I would like to ask Father the first question, the questions raised in this document, the Bishop of Rome, these are the questions which were considered in the context of the theological dialogue of the Joint Commission, the official theological dialogue between the Orthodox and the Catholic Church.
Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church.
So will you, in the course of the work of this commission, since you are a member of this commission, will this document be considered by this commission in the future? Will it be taken into account? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, this document, first of all, is a synthesis, yes, first of all, of the responses to the invitation of John Paul II in Autumn Sin, but also a synthesis of the ecumenical dialogue documents, not only with the Orthodox, but with also the other Christian communions. And we wanted to connect the different dialogues and to harvest the fruits, yes, of the dialogues. And it was interesting to see that, and perhaps it is the main fruit of this document, to see that there is a convergence of all the dialogues regarding the question of primacy and synodality, and especially regarding the necessity for a primacy at a universal level. It's something very interesting, and the relationship between primacy and synodality has already been discussed by the Anglican Catholic dialogue, for example, already as early as in 1978, in terms very similar to the Catholic Orthodox dialogue. But this document, so the Bishop of Rome, has been sent to all patriarchs and Christian leaders in last July, with the question to give their feedback, to give a kind of response to this document by the end of this year, the end of the year 2024, in order that we will be able to make a new synthesis of the responses, and that will be useful also for the synodal process. And regarding your precise question for the Catholic Orthodox dialogue, where Monsignor Ivan Dasco is also a member, he could so testifies of this, that this certainly And now we have two other topics: the question of infallibility and the question of filioque will be discussed. But certainly for the question of the infallibility, I guess that this document will be useful because in other dialogues this question has been dealt with, especially with the Lutheran in the United States and with the Anglican. So I think also the Catholic Orthodox dialogue can take benefit from the other dialogues. We need a dialogue of dialogues.
Дякую, отче. І зараз я передаю мікрофон доктору Анатолію Бабинському.
And now I would like to give the floor to Anatoly Babinsky for the next question.
Presentation. Okay. Добре, отче.
Thank you, Father, for your description of this very important document. And I have a question which is a bit provocative, I would say. I want to discuss this phrase about the first millennium, that we should not require from the East more than was there in the first millennium. I do not completely agree with that, because we live in a different context. First of all, in the first millennium, there were different relations between the church and the state. And we know that the primacy of the Bishop of Rome in the second millennium, especially in the 19th century, developed not so much in the war with the Orthodoxy as in the war with the state, to make church independent of the state, so that the church is more independent. And we understand that nowadays the Eastern churches, well, the autocephaly lets them be independent from one another, but they cannot always be independent of the state. And here primacy is one of the characteristics of the Catholic Church, which actually defends the local churches against the influences of the state. So maybe we should not start the discussion from the very beginning of how primacy can help church be independent of the state, for the church to be able to perform its Christian mission better, because that's the important element.
Yes, well, one of the idea, as I mentioned, of this document is that we should not idealize the first millennium. Yes, first because it was also a millennium of divisions. Yes, Congar give this example that there was almost 250 years of schism between Constantinople and Rome. And without speaking about the Oriental Orthodox churches, yes, pre-Chalcedonian, this was also a wound in the body of Christ, and also the first council, the first schism with the so-called Nestorianism. So, and we should also we cannot disregard what happened in the second millennium, and in any case we should we face also the situation of the third millennium. So we cannot simply come back to the first millennium. Nevertheless, we can take inspiration from the first millennium. And this is why a whole chapter of the document, the Bishop of Rome, is dedicated to the different possible models of source of inspiration of the first millennium, such as the right of appeal, such as the question of the primacy of honor, or the ecumenical councils. So this is my first point. The second point is that ecumenical councils in the first millennium were convoked by the emperor. So this is also a fact that we should take into account. So the link, the situation in the East and in the West was very different, that we now in the second millennium this difference was deepened. Yes, the so-called theory of the two swords and the so-called theory of symphony of powers and so on. So we have also, I think it should be also an interesting topic for an ecumenical dialogue, the relationship between state and church, between nation and church. it is also fundamental to understand the differences in ecclesiology. So you very rightly mentioned this question of the relation between state and church have to be taken into account in an ecumenical dialogue, and it is. I hope that it will be possible sometime to also to have this kind of discussion in the Catholic Orthodox dialogue.
Дякуємо. Чи будуть ще питання?
Since there are no other questions, thank you, Father, for joining us. In a couple of minutes, Father Hyacinthe will have to return to his duties. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And meanwhile, we proceed to our next speaker, the member of the the president of the Ukrainian Catholic University Institute of Ecumenical Studies, Reverend Dr. Ivan Datsko. Father, we're happy to see you, and we've passed the floor to you.
Thank you. Glory to Jesus Christ. This is such a broad topic for discuss. The topic of primate and synodality, and also the Pontifical document. However, Reverend Hyacinthe has already presented everything in detail. That is why I will speak of the collection Bishop of Rome and Eastern Catholic Churches. I will majorly focus on the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and its connections with the Bishop of Rome. I will start with the old times. After the deaths of the apostles in the first 3 centuries, the role of Bishop of Rome was probably more profiled than that of other bishops. This is seen in the person of Pope Clement I, the fourth Bishop of Rome and disciple of Saint Peter, from his letter to the Corinthians. Similarly, we see it in the actions of Pope Victor I at the end of the 2nd century on the issue of celebrating Easter. It is known that the bishops of other dioceses or parishes appealed to the bishops of Rome in various matters, or rather appealed to the Bishop of Rome in case of misunderstandings or if they had some doubts, although we know that such appeals were also received by the bishops of other thrones, the Saint Athanasius the Great of Alexandria and Saint Ambrosius of Mediolanum. Even in times of the First Ecumenical Council in Nicaea in 325, the person of the Pope, and it was the then Pope Sylvester I, did not play any greater role. It was his presence, his stance, his instruction, and above all, approbation of his legates. When the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople was founded in 336 by Emperor Constantine the Great, a certain distinction between different thrones begins, and we see a growing influence of Constantinople together with Alexandria and Antioch and later Jerusalem. A special role was played once again through its legates. It was not personally Pope Leo the Great, Leo the First the Great, 440-461 at the Council of Chalcedon, E 451. And then the cry Petrus per Leonem locutus est. Peter spoke through Leo. And it is from that time the understanding of the Pentarchy as the main 5 thrones, Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem of the entire church begins to be formed. This process of affirming this notion and understanding continued until the reign of Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, who, so to speak, institutionalized this understanding in his Codex Justiniani, 534. However, it is worthwhile to mention that nowhere and never in the first millennium there was a question about universal jurisdiction, ownership of the Bishop of Rome, and it is in our times, it has been repeatedly emphasized in different documents of the International Commission of Theological Dialogue between different churches. However, over time, certain non-church but purely human elements began to play its part in the understanding of the role of the Bishop of Rome, and not only Rome but also other episcopal thrones. Whether we have this function of ministry and service performed, this was well understood by Saint Gregory Dvoyeslav, Pope Gregory the Great, years 590-604, who spent some time of his youth as a deacon and epochresion of the Bishop of Rome in Constantinople, and later he became the Bishop of Rome by calling himself a servant of the servants of God, Servus Servorum Dei. He understood his ministry that he rejected any other titles that would cast any shadow of domination. Therefore, this title, Servus Servorum Dei, is still preserved by the bishops of Rome to this day. Moreover, he did not accept that title assumed by the Patriarch of Constantinople, because only the triune God can rule over the entire universe. Unfortunately, the successors of Gregory the Great did not think and act in this way alongside other patriarchs of the East who did not accept this instruction. Then we had a greater gap between supremacy and between service. What begins today is what is called politics, rivalry, spheres of influence, which led to the first more visible split in the 9th century under Popes Nicholas I and Patriarchs Photius. I'm not going to go into details here. I will only say that after the death of Pope Nicholas and Patriarch Photius, with the passage of times, gradually we have the time of the decline of the papacy in the 9th and 10th centuries. And at the same time, you see the growth of the influence of Byzantium. It was in the 10th century that Kievan Rus developed and gained its strength with Princes Oleg, Olha, Sviatoslav, and Volodymyr the Great, who accepts Christianity from Byzantium, and which, as Pope John Paul II taught, was Orthodox in the faith and Catholic in love. And besides the fact that Kiev was more under the influence of Byzantium, nevertheless, it never, by any legal act or document, did not break its communion with the Bishop of Rome. Another process was the history of the papacy after the crisis of the 9th and first half of the 10th century. With the second millennium, especially thanks to Pope Gregory the Seventh, 1073-1085, a period begins when the bishops of Rome understood their role and mission as the first among and above all ecclesiastical and secular rulers. I will not talk here about the so-called schism of Kurylets in 1054, crusade campaigns, and Pope Innocent III or Boniface III I would like only to mention that the symbol and the visible sign of the papacy was tiara, which symbolized, or rather was perceived as, power over heaven, earth, and purgatory. That's how the concept of dominance took over the leadership role over the ministry. But let's go back to Kiev. It was watching all these processes, but to a greater or lesser extent, it remained faithful to the original principles of its Kiev Christianity. It doesn't break with Constantinople, but repeatedly confirms its communion with the Bishop of Rome. In 1245, the First Council of Lyons, in 1253, on the occasion of the coronation of the King Daniel, or at the Councils of Constance in 1417 and Florence 1439. So here we can come to the conclusion that during the first centuries of its existence, the Church of Kiev cultivated its identity, or its place identity, its local aspect, which has been preserved with the preservation of the heritage that it received from its church, the Mother Constantinople, and its communion with the Bishop of Rome. So even then, Ukraine, the Kievan turned, had communion under both kinds, and this church expected from Constantinople and Rome respect for their identity and locality. And so we come to the Present Council of 1595-96. I would like to underline here that this is not the date of birth of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, as some historians claim, but it is a confirmation of the unity and communion of Kiev with the Bishop of Rome and his Holy See, as it was accepted in terms of Christianity through the adoption of Christianity in Kiev, and it was in 988. One can put forward various difficulties and claims that the Birthday Council was not properly prepared, it was carried out under certain pressure, but there is another important document which consists of 33 articles, preconditions proposed by the bishops of the Kievan Church, beginning to unite with the Bishop of Rome. Unfortunately, again, because we are limited in time, we are not able to analyze all these provisions. However, it is the fact that the Bishop of Rome did not even respond to these conditions, but the episcopate of the Kievan Church, as a representative of the local church, considered them of importance and then completed the Act of Union in 1596. A lack of response from Rome, the bishops of the Kievan Metropolitan could be interpreted as consent according to the principle of qui tacet consentire videtur, who silent, it will be seen that he agrees. And on this basis, please remember, my dear, that Patriarch Joseph ordained Stepan Chmil as Bishop Ivan Choma and Lubomir Huzer as well on the 2nd of April in 1977. In the Western Church, afterwards, there was the time for the Protestant Reformation, equivalent to Catholic Counter-Reformation, the time of the Post-Tridentine Council, the time of the centralization of the papacy, the establishment of its central authority, which found its at the end of this rivalry by proclaiming papal infallibility and universal jurisdiction, which was not spoken about throughout the first millennium. In the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, the Ukrainian Catholic Church preserved its identity and place as much as it could. However, over time, it also fell under the influence of Latinization and Uniatism, which aptly presented some theologians by saying that they departed from their own but did not reach someone else's. The end of quote. After the death of Pope Pius the Ninth, who proclaimed the dogma of the infallibility of the Pope and the universal jurisdiction of the Bishop of Rome, sends divine providence to the Ukrainian Church. The servant of God, Metropolitan Andrei Sheptetsky and Patriarch Yosef Slipy, and later in the Universal Church, Pope John the 23rd, who convenes the Second Vatican Council, and thereby he initiated and opened a new era of rethinking the identity of the Universal Church and the local Eastern churches. During this council, unfortunately, there were a few Eastern bishops who knew and cherished the rights of the Eastern churches, with the exception of the Melkite Patriarch Maximus IV's sake, Patriarch Yosef Slipy, and to some extent Metropolitan Maxim Hermanyuk. Therefore, it is not surprising that the vast majority of theologians believe that the decree on the Oriental churches, Orientalium Ecclesiarum, was perhaps the weakest among all decrees. The documents of the Second Vatican Council, for example, the question of the creation of new patriarchates, which was warned against by the decision of the Universal Council or the Pope, although so far no Pope had ever created new patriarchates. Our church then had mainly historians and a few canonists, mostly educated on the basis of Latin law. The greatest thing that our church has gained, thanks to Patriarch Joseph and Dr. Ivan Hrenyuk, perhaps the greatest theologian that our church had in the 20th century. His beatitude, Patriarch Joseph began to publish various documents in the Monumenta Ukraina Historica, the Annunciator, the Theology, in the Messages from Rome. It was thanks to this publication that we learned about these 33 articles, the prerequisites presented by the bishops of the local Kiev metropolis before restoring unity and community with the Roman Apostolic See. Then we learned that in Eastern churches, under the guidance of bishops, there was the principle of jus eligendi, nominandi et consagrandi, the right to choose, name, and ordain. Equally, that prevailed at the beginning. In the West, the law is perceived territorially unless otherwise stated. But in the East, law is perceived personally unless otherwise stated. Apud occidentalis jus praesimutur territorial nisi alier cavatur, sed apud orientalis jus presumitur personalia nisi aliter cavatur. As young Eugenio Pacelli wrote in his doctoral dissertation, who later became Pope Pius XII, who subsequently did not respect this principle and everywhere adhered to the territorial law. As I mentioned, and I repeat today, during the International Commission for Theological Dialogue between the Catholic and Orthodox churches, from the very beginning of its existence in 1979, clearly outlined its goal, namely the restoration of full communion between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. It is also decided that, in contrast to the practice of past centuries, the members of the Commission first discussed and considered the issues that unite us, such as faith, communion, sacraments, Christ's ministry, church service, etc., in order to then move on to the topics that still divide us. There was also agreement on the fact that the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church recognized each other as sister churches, and therefore issues were raised concerning finding explanation and eventually reaching agreement. In fact, at this stage of the dialogue, along with the issues of power, conciliarity, synodality, and collegiality in the Church, the meetings discussed primarily the role of the Bishop of Rome as primacy and the issues of the Pope's universal jurisdiction, what we heard from Father Hyacinthe, and these are the most important issues that are dividing our churches, and we must approach them sine ira et studio, without anger and passion. As for the position of the Eastern Catholic Churches on the issue of primacy, metropolis, synods, and other churches of universal right, it's no doubt that we have differences in the exercise of the authority of the Roman hierarchy over the Latin Church, which historically coincides with the Patriarchy of the West, with which it is directly subordinate, and the exercise of the same authority over the local Eastern Catholic churches, sui juris, mainly the patriarchal churches. We also understand that the Bishop of Rome, to carry out his minister, coordinator, and moderator of the community of these churches, the Bishop of the Rome of Rome must have the necessary means to carry out this task. But does it really mean that these should be synods? And important in this sense, in the current Eastern legislation, the Code of Canons of the Eastern Churches. This code, I think, is better than the one that we had issued by Pius XII, and we can see its further development, which is quite feasible now. It is about these new forms that we strive for concerning France, including Pope Francis. Under this review, we find a significant number of canons that weren't exclusively of the apostolic sisters to regulate various issues of purely ecclesiastical law. This also testifies to the rather limited and relative autonomy of the Eastern Catholic Churches. However, it should be noted that more than 200 times the Code requires the intervention of the Apostolic See in the internal life of the Eastern Catholic Churches. Bishop Salaha noted it in his works, and this fact limits the autonomy, or rather the locality, of the Eastern Catholic Churches. Moreover, the Code also refers to a particular or local law established by the legislative authority of each church sui juris, and it has to be approved by the Roman Pontiff. This restriction also applies to various areas of the internal life of the Eastern Catholic Churches, such as the function and power of synods. These are consecrated institutions, their members, clerical stages, bishops of different churches. Significant part of these disciplinary issues was entrusted to the patriarchs and their synods according to the Conciliar Decree Orientalium Ecclesiarum. This would not contradict Catholic ecclesiology. As a prospect for the future, we could also use part 3 of the Code. From the Code, Council Decree Orientalium Ecclesiarum, which states that all these legal provisions are established for the present conditions until the Catholic Church and the separated Eastern churches reach full communion.
So the Code presupposes that we will be united. And this means that the Code exists until it comes to the union of unity of churches, not only from the disciplinary provision, but also in case of full communion. Well, the Catholic Church cannot impose these rules as a condition for unity. At the same time, the international commission between the Catholic and Orthodox Church, since its very beginning in 1979, has worked and continues to work, gradually directing its churches into directions which were chosen by common agreement in order to restore full communion between the churches. This communion is based on the unity of faith, on the continuity of experience, and on the fact that the ancient church was undivided. And it also will fundamentally change the relationship between the Eastern churches and the papacy. This is the famous German internet connection. Yes, now we can hear you, but you got disconnected. We're moving closer to the questions. Well, I have a bit to with here. In 2004, the Orthodox presented the project of the future scheme of unity. So all patriarchs with the Bishop of Rome pray for each other. All patriarchs will remember each other, and all patriarchs, including the Bishop of Rome, are included into the diptych, which is read by the deacon during each liturgy. And all patriarchs, including the Bishop of Rome, perform the same sacraments at the same Lord's table, and they do not go too deep into all these disputes of the second millennium, because we will never get out of them, but stay with how things were in the first millennium. And here, as we can refer to Cardinal Ratzinger, not touch the issue of universal, regional, or local jurisdiction yet, and allow each church to live according to the law and order in which it lived and still lives. In fact, at this stage of the dialogue, along with the issues of power, conciliarity, synodality, and collegiality in the church, the meetings discussed primarily the role of the Bishop of Rome, his primacy, and the issues of the universal jurisdiction of the Pope. Well, it will be necessary to reconsider the relationship between the Apostolic See and the Patriarchs and their synods, their powers provided by the congregation, but what is most important is for us to live as we did before, with patriarchs mentioning the Bishop of Rome in their depths. Going back to the wish of Pope John Paul II expressed in the encyclical Ut Unum Sint on the issue of primacy, I will allow myself to quote again Bishop Salah's the Ministry of Unity of the Bishop of Rome in the encyclical of John Paul II Ut Unum Sint. A question that again, the ecumenical dialogue faces again is, in the first millennium, a primacy performed the function of unity. And this was done by the Bishop of Rome, Peter's successor. The difference, that was a fact, the difference between the first and the second millennia is that the first millennium, when the church was undivided, the Bishop of Rome carried out his ministry when Christians were united by fraternal communion, while in the second millennium, de facto is not in that same state in which it was in the first millennium. But for the Orthodox, the standards and experience of the first ecumenical councils should remain unchanged, since they recognize the Bishop of Rome of the first bishop in the ecumenical communion of the churches. For the Orthodox churches, the theory of Pentarchy, the actual organization of the rule of the churches remains unchanged. So to conclude, well, we can say that the task of the Eastern Catholic churches should be to preserve the fullness of their orthodoxy and Catholicism, and the goal of the Orthodox churches is to preserve that which they have so far preserved and again prayed and commemorated at the liturgies of the Bishop of Rome, as they mentioned themselves. And I've already quoted the words of Pope Francis several times. So that was what he said in Istanbul on the 30th of November 2014. In order to faithfully preserve the fullness of the Christian tradition and bring to a conclusion the reconciliation of Christians of the East and the West, the preservation and maintenance of the extremely rich heritage of the churches of the East is of utmost importance, and not only in terms of liturgical and spiritual traditions, but also in terms of the canonical legal order consecrated by the Holy Fathers and Councils, which regulates the life of these churches. And here goes here in Dicastery Integratio number 1516. I consider it is important to emphasize the need to respect this principle as a fundamental mutual condition for the restoration of full communion, which does not mean neither subordination that is said by a Pope, neither subordination of one to another, nor absorption, but rather acceptance of all the gifts that God has given to each in order to reveal to the whole world the great mystery of salvation accomplished by our Lord Christ through the Holy Spirit. I want to assure each of you that in order to achieve the desired goal of full unity, the Catholic Church does not intend to set any conditions, and it did set conditions for centuries, other than the requirement of confession of the common faith, and that in the light of the teachings of the Holy Scriptures and the experience of the first millennium, we are ready to search together for ways in which it will be possible to guarantee the necessary unity of the Church in the present circumstances. The only thing that the Catholic Church aspires to, and for which I, as a Bishop of Rome, strive, the Church that sits in love, is communion and the Orthodox with the Orthodox churches. This is our ecumenical roadmap for the nearest future. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Father. You have almost managed within the allotted time frame. We have at 4:45 we will have a coffee break, so we have time for one question. As far as I know, there is a question from Anatoly Babansky, so I would like to give the microphone to him. Thank you, Father. I have a question which is as provocative as a question I had to Father Hyacinthe. You mentioned the recovery of the title, the Patriarch of the West, by Pope Francis. It was without much explanation, and we understand the ecumenical dimensions of that, but we understand that the Church is an institution which is very conservative, and it has this whole package of titles and universal course and so on. But how relevant is it today? Well, how well is he the Patriarch of the West while most Catholics live in the south? Wouldn't it be logical, just as in the Byzantine Church, I mean the Orthodox Byzantine Church, to have several patriarchs? Maybe the Latin Church should better have a patriarch of South, North, East, and West, because he's not the Patriarch of the West anymore. I will have a just as provocative answer as you had a provocative question. You may not know about that, but former Archbishop of München and Freising, Cardinal Juri Dibsner, asked his beatitude several times whether it's possible to establish a Germanic patriarchate that will include the churches of Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and Luxembourg, and maybe even the Netherlands. Do you know where the difficulties would be? Well, the Rome wants to centralize. What concerns the patriarchy? This is something that the Orthodox world insisted on. Why was that? Because Pope Benedict, following the advice of some of his advisors, stopped using the title the Patriarch of the West, and it was not discussed while he was alive. And this Pope, this year, after Benedict's death, restored this title. You are right, but here we cannot do anything because the Pope should give instructions to his staff members so that they establish the respective mechanisms in South America or in North America. I would like to remind you of some other things. There were discussions in which Cardinal Félicien Mercier took part, a great cardinal, and on the part of Anglicans there was Lord Halifax, and they asked Metropolitan Andrej whether they can create the Anglican patriarch or English patriarchate. That would be probably more powerful than the Roman one, because that will include would include England, North America, Canada, New Zealand, and so on. But if there was goodwill, this could be created. But the Roman Curia doesn't have this goodwill. We have been speaking about the Papal Synod. The Synod has the right to decide, upon new rules through legislation to establish the new borders of eparchies. And the Papal Synod is an advisory body, so the Pope gathers 300 of bishops coming to Rome, collects their opinions, but the Synod doesn't take the decision. So the ball is on the Bishop of Rome's side. So we need someone like Pope John 23rd. I really respect Pope John Paul II, but in 5 years he did more than the whole centuries of his predecessors. So there is another question which is relevant for the Orthodox world. What concerns Pentarchy, there is also more theory there, saying that Rome was the first Istanbul is or Constantinople is the second Rome, and Moscow wants to be the third Rome, and there may be no fourth. There's also a question of the status of other Eastern patriarchs. Except Patriarchy, we also have Bulgarian, Serbian, Romanian, and Moscow patriarchates. So what is the status? You know that Pope John Paul II asked also Constantinople and Moscow about the recognition of our patriarchate. The Constantinople said yes, but Moscow said no, the third Rome. So I don't know whether I answered your question. Yes, thank you. But you know, there's a whole range of things which you, as a young theologian and historian, could analyze. Thank you. Thank you, Father. And we have finished the first part of this discussion. I invite everyone to a coffee break, and we will resume at 5 p.m. I know everyone is tired because this is the last day and the topic is complicated, but if it's not for us, at 5 p.m.
Fine, so we are going to continue. This is the final session for the day. We will try to make an attempt to put aside our phones because we know that we are always tempted to use our phones. However, let's focus on the 3 presentations left. There will be a lot of interesting information which will be very instructive. It's over to Volodymyr Buraha, Vice Rector and Professor at the Kyiv Theology Academy of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Eastern Catholic Churches in the light of the document Bishop of Rome. So I will try to be brief. Probably I will leave out some quotations. So in Orthodox and in Eastern churches, there was a standpoint that the model for reconciliation for 2 churches, it has to be the experience of the first millennium. This period of the church was not divided as some paradigm of unity as it is understood now. Churches of West and East during the 1st century, despite all the conflicts, could be in unity. This idea was reflected in the documents of the Second Vatican Council, then in the Papal Magisterium encyclical Ut Unum Sint, and also in documents of Orthodox Catholic dialect. These are well-known documents. That is why, if to speak about the Bishop of Rome, which summarizes the fruits of episcopal dialogue, we also have this topic. Provision 88 states that the principles and models which were honored in the 1st century could be paradigmatic for the future recovery of full-fledged communication between churches, and a quote. And we also have another quote which was mentioned today, Cardinal Ratzinger's the future Pope the 16th. Rome cannot expect from East more than what was shaped during the 1st century. However, the problem is that the heritage of the 1st century is in different ways interpreted in the East, in the West. Catholics and Orthodox, they agree that in the 1st century there was some primate of Rome. However, if to speak about this primate, there are different interpretations of Catholics and Orthodox. That is why what is very important for this dialogue over all these decades is interpretation, or rather reinterpretation of the heritage of the first millennium. This is This is probably rewriting of the 1st millennium, but we have a reference to the 1st millennium, trying to find the common ground for unity which could be implemented now. One of the key external signs were councils, local and universal, when we had bishops of the East and West participating. That is why it was important to honor the decrees of these councils. The document which was adopted in 2016 as part of the dialogue shows us 3 categories. This is agreement or symphony of the House of Church, synergy of the Bishop of Rome, and the 3rd one, agreement or synfrontes of either patriarchs. In 2010, Northern American consultation drawing on the legacy of the 1st millennium offered a model for synergy for the future United Church, the role of the Bishop of Rome in this hypothesized church. At the same time, if to speak about the understanding of synergy of Roman bishop, we do not have unity between Orthodox and Catholics. That is why in the collection, when we speak about the authority of the universal church, we still have a question about that. Apart from a general discussion about the primate of the Bishop of Rome, but in this dialogue, some practical questions were raised concerning legal powers of the Bishop of Rome, and participants of dialogue here paid attention to the council, Nicaean Council, and I think that in the collection of the Bishop of Rome, this council is mentioned most frequently. It is, you may find even more references than to other councils, because at this council there was this issue posed about revision of canons, and Nicaean canons speak about the possibility of appealing to the Bishop of Rome, and that the Bishop of Rome can initiate reconsideration of these decisions which were taken in other local churches. We have the procedure of repeated reconsideration, and in the Latin tradition it was always interpreted as the recognition of a primate of universal bishop. In Orthodox and canonists, we didn't have a unified interpretation of these issues, these decrees. We have a different stand of Constantinople and Moscow Patriarchate on this subject matter. The collection Bishop of Rome refers to the Moscow documents. That is why, to speak about appeals, it was not something which was spread all over Universal Church.
And as proof, it indicates the resolutions of several unions in the appeal. So according to the logics of this Moscow document, it appears like the court system of each local church is closed, and you cannot appeal and go with your appeals to any other churches. However, this position about the closed position of each local church does not meet neither the canonical tradition nor the practice of the churches. We have many examples of when the Eastern bishops submitted the appeals, and then we also have the fourth council. Those are rules 9 to 17, which grant the Patriarch of Constantinople the right to accept these appeals. So the idea about the fact that each local church has a closed judicial system and does not presuppose any appeals to outside is not confirmed by the practice, because in the first millennium, this practice was a norm. And now the Constantinople Patriarchate insists on the fact that it is the first among the modern local churches who has the right to accept the appeals, referring to the canons of the Chalcedonian Council. This possibility of creating a modern procedure for considering the appeals was considered. Back in 2018, that was one of the groups which actually stated that the Unified Church should have revived the practice of appeals, based on the practices of the Nicene Council, and the American Theological Consultation went even further, and they voiced their proposals in 2010. In cases of conflicts between the bishops, and in case their hierarchies, which cannot be solved on regional level, the Bishop of Rome should organize and appeal court process in case of conflict between them. The Bishop of Rome has to be a mediator and make sure that the question is resolved. And what is interesting that this consultation believes that the right to consultation can be applied to the matters of doctrine as well, which means that they can address and ask the Bishop of Rome for authoritative instructions, including in the matters of doctrine. And it's obvious that this extension of the right of appeal to the doctrine as well, is something that the Orthodox will most probably not agree with at the moment. But nevertheless, this initiative was voiced by this North American consultation, and it is important that the officially delegated representatives of Orthodox and Catholic churches participate in it. Therefore, the Orthodox Church agreed with this possibility, at least at that level. For me, it is important to stress here that this consideration of the right to appeal within the framework of the Orthodox Catholic dialogue caused a very significant polemics in the Catholic Church itself. And I would like to remind you about the discussion of the Rana document, where it became obvious that there is no unity between the Orthodox churches when it comes to the questions of the essence and scope of unity. And then it got aggravated between, the dispute between Constantinople and Moscow churches, and one of the most important issues they couldn't agree on was the question of appeal, and later on the Patriarch of Constantinople accepted 2 appeals from Ukrainian jurisdictions, and after that the decisions were taken to cancel all canonical penalties that were imposed on them. And that decision was a very important precedent. Before 2018, the questions of appeals were more of a theoretical appeal, polemics, but after 2018, it transitioned into a practical field. And starting from 2022, after the full-scale invasion, I should remind you that the Russian Church started depriving of their rank those priests who openly spoke against the war, and the same, Constantinople started canceling the decision taken in Moscow and so on, and now there are many priests from Russia and Belarus in other countries who have gone through the procedure of canonical rehabilitation by Constantinople. So we have an established practice of like that now, and there are several decisions taken every year. So this is not just a theoretical dispute, these are the practices. There are even more vivid examples, and I would like to draw attention to one of those. A cleric of the Moscow Patriarchate, Igumen Petroveremey, was deprived of his rank by the Moscow Church Court. It seems to me it was in the beginning of 2023. He appealed to Constantinople, and the Constantinople Synod elevated all the punishment that were imposed on him in Moscow. But after this rehabilitation, Igumen was accepted by the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, and now he is in Plovdiv there. So from the point of view of Moscow, he's a person without a rank. But at the same time, it's not only Constantinople who doesn't recognize that, but also the Bulgarian Church, which is considered pro-Moscow, but they still accepted him as a person who was rehabilitated. So this extends the field of the conflict, because other local churches should also decide what to do with these clerics, whether they recognize them or they don't recognize them, and so on. So it seems to me that at the moment this is the only incident of when a cleric of the Russian Orthodox Church was accepted not by the Constantinople Church, but another local church. And I think we have to pay attention to that as well. But once again, what is important for us, it is to stress, in the context of discussing this document, that this discussion concerning the right to appeal in the Orthodox environment was directly stimulated by the dialogue with the Catholics. Because when there appeared this challenge that you need to have certain position in the dialogue with the Catholics, when they were discussing the documents, it was obvious that there is no unified position, and they started this intra-Orthodox discussion. So this interdenominational dialogue initiated this intradenominational conflict. What concerns the results of the dialogue, it suggests certain model where there could be two aspects. One is the universal councils, and the other one is performing the function of mediation in case of conflicts of, which have some doctrinal character. So first aspect, this is the convocation of the universal councils, and the second one is considering these appeals. And then the churches preserve the right to internal management according to their traditions, including the election of bishops. And I would also remind you that there are documents telling you that the right to appeal does not presuppose the prevalence of Rome over other churches. So this is also stressed in the document, the Bishop of Rome. So right to hear appeals is there, but internal traditions of each church are preserved. So the document, the Bishop of Rome, suggests a certain model for further unity, which is based on the criteria of the first millennium. What does this model presuppose? First of all, this is communication through sacrament. So this is like an informal sign and informal manifestation of this communication. Then this model also presupposes the recognition of the primacy of honor of the Bishop of Rome. Then connection between primacy and synodality is considered as the 34th apostle canon. The right to appeal should be based on the respective documents, and at the same time it's necessary to preserve the variety of life in the churches. So this is what you can see in item 170 of the document, the Bishop of Rome. So as you can see, based on the achievements of the dialogue of the previous decades, a certain model has been offered, and this model is interpreted as recovering the experience and restoring the experience of the first millenniums. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting for me to listen to this presentation. We've heard about many details which have not been known to us before. If there are some questions that you have, I think that now is a good moment to do that, or after the final presentation we will also have a short Q&A session. Are there any questions as of now? Glory to Jesus Christ. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about this distinction between informal and formal unity for the church. Is it really possible to have a situation in which we have the church united in its informal aspect, however it will not be united formally or with regard to some legal aspects? Is it possible, and do we really need this formal unity as such? Thank you for the question. We are discussing the collection, the Bishop of Rome. I didn't have enough time to spell it out in detail, but in the documents you have several times mentioned the importance of sacramental unity. It is about Eucharist. This is what comes first. However, to speak about sacramental unity, it presupposes also all jurisdictional aspects to be resolved. If I understood the logic of the collection, it focuses on jurisdictional unity. However, there is always the point about sacramental. As far as the Orthodox Church is concerned, in an ecumenical dialogue, the Orthodox always mention that we have this cup for Eucharist, and together we can actually go to the Eucharist. However, if we have some oppositions, we are not ready for the Eucharistic unity. In the Catholic and Orthodox tradition, we see the following position, that we will have unity of all secondary questions, and then it is about the Eucharist, yes, and also the jurisdiction issues, but they are also important. Yes, if to speak about the Bishop of Rome, this is a dogmatic question, and it is also about jurisdiction. Here I can only emphasize that Greeks and Catholics and Orthodox, they have a similar vision here. I'm not sure, but I'm not an expert when it comes to Oriental churches. I've heard it from one of the participants of the dialogue from the Church of Ethiopia. It was a private conversation during which he mentioned that the problem was that originally we had to explain it to the Church of Ethiopia what they believe in, and then the differences in our position. We faced the situation when theological thinking is not well developed. It was difficult for us to find a common ground and to speak the same language. Well, the Oriental churches, we have this question. In Christology, there are some issues unresolved, and this is a comment from me. Here I can quote Archmetropolite Kirill, who provided an example about a lack of unity between Orthodox churches and Oriental churches. All Christology issues were resolved also as far as the documents are concerned. And then he says that what is dividing churches, this is not only dogmatic doctrine or something different. If to speak about a dialogue between Catholics and Orthodox, even when we resolve all those issues dividing us, there is no confidence that we will reach this full unity. So it seems to us that everything is resolved. However, if to speak about full communion, we do not have communion under both kinds. Professor, I have a question to you. Is the Russian Orthodox Church ready to adopt this stand? Because we had Metropolitan Alfei present, which is about the fact that Orthodox churches, I don't want to quote once again, to read what I have already read out, that Orthodox churches, they remain as they are. And we have different attitude towards the Bishop of Rome, and this, and us remembering the bishop remains the same. I think that you should address this question to the Russian church, because I do not belong to the church affiliated with Russia. That is why I cannot speak on their behalf. So I do not see the readiness to do this. Yes, thank you. Thank you for an interesting presentation and an interesting question. Now it is over to Ihor Shaban, who is the head of the Patriarch Commission on interconfessional and interreligious relations. Thank you. Glory to Jesus Christ. In terms of the discussion about joint Eucharist or communion under both kinds, Lubomir in the past offered an experiment in Ukraine. So let's do this in Ukraine for us to have a common prayer. And there was an answer from the Synod of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that this is going to be a new union, and they disagree. That was in times of metropolitan. I'm not sure about the reaction of Latin Church, but there was no need. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to speak about this new document about the role of the Bishop of Rome and his ministry. We will start with the general review. The document of the Dicastery of the Promotion of Christian Unity seems to me quite bold and modern. However, at the very beginning, the authors of the text note that the status of the text is only a research document. So it means that its purpose is to offer objective synthesis of the latest ecumenical developments on this topic. This synthesis is offered as a contribution to possible future discussions. Possible future discussions, in a sense, as an instrumentum laboris, in the hope that it will contribute to further theological studies and dialogue, as well as stimulate practical proposals. Since the issue of primacy, especially in the Orthodox Catholic dialogue, has so far reached a deadlock, the Catholic Church has made a very good move to be proactive in voicing certain ideas, and at the same time to show other denominations and other churches that their thoughts and beliefs have been heard, that they have been acknowledged. However, it should also be emphasized that the Orthodox Church to send their reaction to the draft to this document, because the first one was in 2021 and the one that we are discussing right now is the second one. There has been no response, no advice from any of the Orthodox churches. So they've sent this document and received no feedback. While analyzing the text and its openness to criticism of primacy, the authors of the document do not give any specific advice or possible solutions to the current historical reproaches of both the Orthodox and Protestant churches. In other words, it seems to me that the matter didn't go beyond the description. The document doesn't even hint at possible changes or any specific advice on what first steps should be taken in order to improve the ecumenical climate between the churches. The text refers back to the encyclical Ut Unum Sint. Here we can draw a parallel that then St. Pope John Paul II tried to ask questions and expected to receive advice from all Christians on how to fulfill his ministry. But now the Vatican Dicastery, having collected these recommendations in one great document, has only voiced them. For some reason, there is a feeling that the next step is still up in the air, at least for now. Although perhaps this is already rather a big and positive step forward, and discussion can evolve from it, which would lead to further concrete changes. But when this is going to happen and in what way is difficult to anticipate. The second one is about concepts and the way they are presented in the text. The text uses quite a few different descriptions. I don't know how many of you got familiarized with the text, so probably I could also encourage you to do that. It consists of 200 pages. It is freely accessible. Unfortunately, we do not have it in Ukrainian yet. There are many descriptions, concepts, and views on the ministry of the Bishop of Rome presented in the Bishop of Rome. They are both theological and legal terms, which, in my opinion, will require a deeper explanation and coverage in the future. It is quite possible that these views will become a good foundation for further discussion, both between different denominations, also within the Catholic Church, which, as I recall, has 24 churches of its own right, sui juris. Here are a few of interesting descriptions that caught my eye when I was reading this text, and I think that they will require a more detailed explanation of what the authors had in mind. Paragraph 98, where the authors of the text trying to explain authority and power as separate concepts, write that authority in the church is not synonymous with government or jurisdiction, which is quite an interesting explanation, though it seems to be quite ambiguous to my mind. Paragraph 11 speaks of the ministry of primacy in the 21st century as a shared collegial and personal authority in the church. I think that this is not a commonly understood provision for all Christians. At least the long-standing discussion of the Ravenna documents since 2007 has also raised these points, and the parties of the discussion have not come to a common denominator then. To continue these points, it serves as a linking point between something that is regional, local, and universal levels of church, which is a rather interesting statement of the first millennium, but whether the majority of traditional churches accept it is a matter of debate. Instead, in paragraph 174, we have the need for a balance between primacy and primates emphasized. Also, we have primates in plural, which also seems to be an interesting statement in the bosom of the Catholic Church and emphasizes the importance of maintaining harmony between the main authority, namely the papal primacy, and local or collegial forms of leadership in the Church. The idea of balance indicates that while the primacy of one person as Bishop of Rome is important for the unity of the Church, other levels of authority and responsibility must also be considered in order to ensure the effective governance of the Church. Perhaps in the light of this approach, it would be useful to distinguish between the two important roles of the Bishop of Rome. We have spoken about that extensively today as the head of the whole Catholic Church and as the head of the local Roman Catholic Church separately.
Just a couple of words about the Eastern Catholic Church. I know that Anatoly will be speaking about that, but I will mention the text of the document also doesn't leave the Eastern Catholic Churches unattended, and we have paragraph 130 stating that the churches in their own right, that's sui juris, which are in full communion with the Roman See, retain their Eastern identity and autonomy. It is not entirely clear to me what autonomy we are talking about here. But it is interesting that in the text we see the desire to show the current state of the relations between the Eastern Catholic Churches and the Bishop of Rome, well, through the eyes of the Orthodox. They consider this current model to be wrong and unacceptable. And this question emphasizes one of the main concerns in the Orthodox Catholic relations, the preservation of the church autonomy in conditions of the future unity. So what kind of autonomy should it be? Well, perhaps after the publication of this document, our Greek Catholic theologians and students who are present here in this room will you'd be able to use this text and try to develop new ideas and suggest new models of unity between the churches sui juris, which are well within this one Catholic Church. Well, paragraph 26 is very interesting for me. Well, this paragraph 26 of the appendix to the proposals of the plenary assembly, and those are the items in the end of the document where they just say that serving in love of the Bishop of Rome as a model of unity could be realized differently in the East and in the West. Although what it should be and what it should mean in practice is a question to be answered. And similarly, paragraph 128 describes the concept of restoring the balance between unity and diversity in the Church, emphasizing the importance of local structures to support dialogue and cooperation between traditions, and stating that with regard to the Eastern churches, there are views that the relationship of the Bishop of Rome with the Eastern churches and their bishops have to be substantially different from the ones that are accepted in the Latin Church now. And also, in my opinion, noteworthy is paragraph 131, which partially repeats the thesis of 1993 of the Parliament document, condemning the method and model of the unitism that's practically calling to on the Eastern Catholic churches to discuss the search for another newer model of unity which will be acceptable to all Eastern churches, including the Orthodox Church. And the fourth, suggestions. The term sui juris is mentioned twice in this document, so not that many times, like paragraphs 130 and 175. And it is used only in the context of the Eastern Catholic churches. However, for a better understanding of relationship between all local Catholic churches and not only them, in my humble opinion, it would also be important to emphasize that the Latin Church or Roman Catholic Church is also a church sui juris. In particular, we could suggest some changes to paragraph 15 to distinguish more clearly between the duties of the Pope, especially between his ministry as the head of the Roman Catholic Church and his service of unity among all Christians. A specific distinction should be made between his patriarchal ministry in the Latin Church, sui juris, and his ministry as the first promotium in the community of churches. This would better reflect the role of the Bishop of Rome, where on the one hand he fulfills his patriarchal duties in the Latin Church, and on the other hand he serves the unity of all Christians, including the Eastern churches. And such distinction would help avoid confusing head functions and allow the Eastern churches to maintain their autonomy while recognizing the special ministry of the Pope as a primate in the wider community of churches. Very similar ideas can be found in other paragraphs, like paragraph 149, which clearly distinguishes between the ministry of the Bishop of Rome, who simultaneously fulfills several roles as a local bishop of the Roman diocese, as a primate of the Western or Latin Church, and again, like sui juris here, and as a minister and as a guarantor of unity on the universal level. And again, some ecumenical dialogues have called for a clear distinction between the different responsibilities, especially between his patriarchal ministry in the Church of the West and his ecumenical ministry of unity in the community of churches. And I think that these statements should be developed in the context of ecumenical efforts, as such a distinction can help avoid future misunderstandings and contribute to building better, more open relationships with the others non-Catholic churches. This distinction of patriarchal ministry within the Latin Church and the ministry of universal primacy, which aims to ensure the unity of the entire Christian church, can help resolve historical disputes and provide a basis for restoring full visible unity with other traditions, particularly the Orthodox churches. Thank you. Thank you, Father. I see that we are finishing with what we started from. We started by Yevhen Hlibovitsky, who said that he has more questions than answers, and he asked many questions, and we have to think on them more. And here we again have a very similar case when we have a document which is a very strong one, an important step forward, but it still leaves a lot of undecided things and issues. First of all, it's necessary to find an answer to them in the future, and secondly, these should be the answers by specific institutions reflected in specific decisions of theirs, not just documents. And we can perceive this document as a certain stage, but there's a lot of work to do in future, and I think that the Catholic Orthodox dialects should be able to participate in that as well. Do we have any questions from the audience? From the speeches of the presenters, I understood that this document is kind of an essence of the ecumenical work of the Catholic Church, and that we are speaking here about the Bishop of Rome. And I right to understand? Not exactly, not completely. What concerns the Bishop of Rome? So, does this document deal with other disputable issues, which are the point of collision at this Orthodox Catholic border, so to say, like some other issues of doctrine, for example, like filioque, for example? All those issues were resolved earlier. Okay, thank you. The documents of the Orthodox Ukrainian Orthodox Catholic dialect was recently translated into Ukrainian and published, so you can read them. And they've been available in other languages for a long time, but a good translation into Ukrainian was produced quite recently, and Father Ihor may have a copy. I don't have a copy, but I think the library should have it. Okay, thank you. This document, this is a collection of old works of all dialects, but only those which relate to the ministry of the Bishop of Rome, with positive sides and the criticism. They collected it all into one document. It's a big chunk of work. And they compared the documents starting from 1960s to the present, all the dialogues that took place in North America, in Africa, in other parts of the world, and they collected it all into one document. So this is not a binding document. It's rather a compendium. May I? Yes, please. But please be brief, because we are running out of time. Well, first of all, I would like to say that this presentation by Father Ihor Shaban was very good, because he really covered the main points. I have two remarks. You mentioned that you first thought that Ravenna was adopted and then Moscow declined it. Let us remember that Ravenna was the decisions in Ravenna were taken after the meeting in Belgrade. So, in my opinion, that was the best assembly, the General Assembly we have seen. There was such an euphoria that in the end, when Metropolitan Kisura organized an Orthodox sermon, we all said, let us find an agreement. So we have almost reached unity. Unfortunately, next year we will not be able to do the same. The Moscow Patriarchate did not stay until the end at this conference. At that time, they were represented by Archbishop, and they laughed because they were the representatives of the Estonian Church. And in 2011, the Russian Patriarchate proclaimed that they don't accept this document. And the other document about sui juris, what is meant? That's autonomous in Greek. So sui juris, autonomous, and local. For me, these are rather synonyms. It's like the Codex of the Canons of Eastern Churches that uses this. So we need to decide whether it's autonomous or local. The Latin language translates our language local as particularis or localis. Particularis is more of a surgical word, I would say. So I believe that as a local church, we should use the word local church law. This is what your friend asked previously, and we have already discussed the fact that we should still speak about filioque. I don't know why. Well, because these are empty talks, because there has already been a decision taken that those churches using it should keep using it. Those who don't use it should not start using it. And the Orthodox agreed upon that. But on the contrary, I would like to draw your attention to those suggestions of the Orthodox Church where they basically say that we should live as we have lived earlier, in our piety and devotions and so on.
Yeah, so this is going to be the final part of the event. I would like to invite Dr. Anatoly Babensky, professor of the Ukrainian Catholic University Research Fellow of the UCU Church History Institute. Glory to Jesus Christ. I made a fatal mistake because I opted for the topic which was obvious in the light of the document about Eastern Catholics and the Bishop of Rome. And I think I've heard a lot. We heard the presentation by Dr. Hyacinthe and Father Shaban about Eastern Catholics topic in the document, in the collection. That is why I think that I can more freely express myself. To start with, the document is of quite a great importance, and I think that it is both pessimistic and optimistic. Pessimistic because when you read all of these dialogues and about unions, Lutheran, Evangelical, Baptist churches having different ideas about primacy, it seems that it's impossible to have one common ground. And if to speak about the Ecumenists of Catholic Church, they need to hold so many dialogues, and I really sympathize with them, as it is not easy to make sure that everyone is on the same page. However, it is also an optimistic document. Every chapter has a certain summary, opening up some more possibilities. I do not necessarily agree with the quite a pessimistic stance of Dr. Ihor. If to speak about these oppositions that we heard about from Hyacinthe, that there is a certain assumption, a thesis, antithesis, and then we have synthesis of them. What is positive is that in these conclusions, we see the readiness of the Catholic Church to take into consideration these different positions coming from different sides. and even to change their position with regard to some of these issues, and I will mention some of these examples. So this document was a response to Autunum Sancte. Paul John II invited everyone to participate in a dialogue, and he said very important words. He invited to launch the dialogue for us to listen to arguments of each other without futile discussions, without getting sidetracked, and also fulfilling Christ's will and the will of his church. Among all those documents which were analyzed, we do not have the answer of Eastern Catholics. And on the one hand, it is understood that Autunum Sancte was the address to those who are not in communion with the Bishop of Rome. Probably there was no expectations to have response from Eastern Catholic churches. However, I think that Eastern Catholics have a lot to say about primacy of the Bishop of Rome, as we heard in the presentation of Dr. Ihor, both positive and negative, because they have a lot of experience with having the communion with the Holy See. If to speak about Ukrainian Catholics, all the discussions of the 60s about synod, synodality, patriarchate, diaspora, they always touched upon the role of the Bishop of Rome as a universal bishop, the balance between local and universal church. Also, to speak about an ecumenical concept and the most contemporary version of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, take into consideration the mission the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church expresses its interest in terms of clarification of the role of a primacy. And when we have this primacy clarified about different services, is not only going to enrich the universal church in its current ecclesial form, but also it will have a positive impact on prospects of mutual understanding between Christians. That is why I think that this document could be even richer if you had also the opinion of the Eastern Catholics, but also representatives of Eastern Catholics, the Copts, the Mennonites, and others. About Eastern Catholics in the Bishop of Rome, a lot has been said already, so there isn't much I can add. What is important in the context in which we speak about these churches, this is about the 21st century understanding of primacy. When we speak about different levels of this primate, regional, local, and universal, this part starts with the summary of the ecumenical consensus, that we have some synchronicity between the universal and local church. The local church will, according to Father Datsko Ecclesia Particularis, in Latin, this is the smallest unit of church, and we also have an ecumenical consensus that universal context, they exist at the same time. And this is quite a revolutionary statement, because classical or Latin ecclesiology always emphasize that the universal church is ontologically, and this is something which comes first. It means that when we have Holy Spirit during Pentecost time, when the church was established, it was already universal. And that because of the fact that apostles spoke all the languages of the world, it meant that the universal church is always before the local church. It means that ontologically it comes first. That is why the Second Vatican Council spoke of Lumen Gentium, and this is what was documented, that particular church was established following the universal church's image. That is why in this document, when we speak about this document, we have an ecumenical breakthrough here. We have at the same time particularity and universality of churches. So on the basis of the document synthesis summary, we cannot say that the universal church is something which comes first. According to this document, the universal church is not a composition of local churches, and a local church is not a fragment of a universal church. And these reflections help me to have better understanding, Catholic understanding of internal correlation between local and universal church. Here I like to quote, the church is Catholic, it makes universal local and local universal. Internal correlation between these two positions could be reflected as an understanding. This is not only about coexistence, but also some connections in this correlation. Perichoresis, when we have triune communion, is seen as ecclesiological reflection.
So it seems to me that we have here an example of a very positive step of the ecumenical theology. So this first chapter, in the context of which we further talk about Eastern Catholics. So the next chapter considered the connection between the universal and regional levels. And it is interesting that the subtitle of this chapter could be translated from Latin as "following your own right." So this is one of the quotations. And the broader context is that Unitatis and Unitatis Disintegratio, they claimed that Eastern churches have the right to follow their own right and tradition. An interesting aspect of this chapter is that we have already talked here about the Jus Divinum, the divine law, and you know that the divine law is connected to the primate of Rome and the eparchy. And you can find this in the textbooks, the older textbooks, that this regional level exists only because of the goodwill of the Bishop of Rome, and he can actually cancel it at any time. And you can find it in such in writings of such canonists as this Slovak Jesuit. I don't remember. Maybe he's not Slovak. Maybe he's a Croatian. But he wrote that this regional level can be eliminated by Pope at any moment. So all these patriarchates, and I think that, yes, his last name was Rurek. So what the Second Vatican Council started talking about, and what is reinforced by this document, is that recognition of that this regional level in the churches, like patriarchates and there exists because of the divine providence, because there was this God's will to have these regional unions of local churches, which we call the local churches, or regional churches, sui juris churches, and so on. This is a very positive aspect of this document, in my opinion. And we don't speak here about divine law, but we can actually discuss whether this divine providence and divine law is more or less important, and what is the correlation between them. If the God wanted to have a Bishop of Rome and to have regional unions of local churches, then I think that this is a kind of a breakthrough. So in this context, when we speak about regional churches, we can start speaking about Eastern Catholic churches, and they are called as a specific paradigm, although I would rather say that they are a specific phenomenon at a regional level. As churches sui juris, and this was mentioned by Father Ihor, they are in complete union with the Holy See, and they preserve identity within the framework of synodal structures. And in this context, we speak about the fact that the Orthodox do not consider the existence of Eastern Catholic Church as a model of existence. This chapter ends with an interesting reference to Unitatis Integratio, which, about these disciplines, that this document hints to the Orthodox that in case of unity, they will have this right to follow their own discipline. And for me, as a reader of this document, as a Greek Catholic, a question arises: can the Eastern Catholic churches do the same and follow their own disciplines? Because it doesn't say directly that it pertains to Eastern Catholics, and I think that this should be worked on, although we may interpret it as a call to all churches, Eastern Catholic and Orthodox, to restore their own traditions, especially this pertains to Greek Catholics. And the question is whether Eastern Catholics have to do this upon their own initiative and just inform the Holy See that from now on we will live according to our disciplines, or this should be done after a certain discussion. And then there's also the doubts in Unitism. This was mentioned already. I'm not going to dwell upon that in much detail. The matter of Unitism is here separated from the phenomenon of Eastern Catholic churches here in this document, and it is stressed that it's important to distinguish the Unitism from the present reality of Eastern Catholic churches. So here I think this document is very positive, and to a certain extent this is a step forward. The next chapter of this subchapter about interconnections between regional and universal and local is, and it is because they speak about the regional level in the Western Church, and this is related to this question I asked Father Ivan Letsko. And I think it's important that in the Latin Church they have this discussion about the fact that the Latin Church is too big, and there may be different Susurist churches within it. Just as there are 20 Eastern churches, there may be 50 Western churches, I think, and this at least 50. I don't know whether the Church of France, which has a very long theological tradition, and they have their own liturgical specifics, and I'm sure they have other specifics. I don't know why they can't be a Susurist church. I think this is an open question, and this chapter dwells upon the matter of different regional unities being possible in the West as well, and this could also facilitate the ecumenical dialogue. And here I will just give you a remark. I think it's not right to consider the Catholic dialogue and there are several local churches which have the dialogue with the Roman Catholic Church, but the Roman Catholic Church may have dozens of local churches. They don't have the status of autocephaly, but they still are there, and this is almost the conclusion of my speech in the context of the main topic we have here. So what concerns the document itself? This publication is not limited to the document only, because after these dialogues were there were also the proposals of the Dicastery, how all these things could be realized in real life at the level of the Catholic Church, and it seems to me there are many interesting proposals there. First of all, this is what we would like to highlight in the context of Eastern Catholic churches and the Bishop of Rome. So this is the reconsideration of the canonical law in the Eastern churches and in the West, is the Latin Church. And if we speak here about the context of the document on the Bishop of Rome, this is something that can be reconsidered in the present-day codes. At the same time, they suggest the proposal by Maximus IV, who says that the Pope could have a synodus with him, like a permanent synod that would consist of Eastern patriarchs or, let's say, Western patriarchs, whether if there are several of them, or Western archbishops, whatever you call them. But this is a suggestion of the Dicastery to deepen this synodal format within the Catholic Church. And there is also this suggestion that the synods, the synodality which is now developing in the Western Church, used the synodality in Eastern churches, Eastern Catholic churches, as an example, because synods have legislative authority. They are not advisory bodies like they have in the Latin Church. So as for me, these suggestions which are connected with Eastern Catholics are very important, and if all this develops further and is taken into account in the Catholic Church, we will be able to see some real ecumenical changes, and they may improve the relations with the Orthodox, but not only Orthodox, because the dialogue is both about Western and Eastern church communities. And to conclude the topic of our discussion about locality and primate in the context of this document, and this is, by the way, the question Father Hyacinthe mentioned when he said that on the one hand the Eastern Catholic churches are on the one hand global communities which exist in the whole world, but at the same time they are considered in the context of these regional unions. And it seems to me that this is a very important and interesting question in the context of ecumenical dialogue in Ukraine. The question is, how do we understand locality and what is a local church? When I was on my way here, I looked through the Orthodox Encyclopedia of the Russian Church, because this word is used in the Slavonic concept. It is translated into Latin as particularis, which is not a full equivalent. And at the same time, I don't know whether it has any specific equivalent in the Greek language and not just the word local. So this is the Slavonic context, but it doesn't matter at the moment. As far as I understand, locality and orthodoxy is interpreted as a synonym of autocephaly. And in these discussions in Ukraine, we can hear about the single local church and so on. So this is still connected with certain territorial principle. At the same time, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, its theology of locality was developing in a different direction in the 20th century, and it was considered not as a territorial category, but as a qualitative categories. And in the Catechism of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, it is considered in the chapter about enculturation, and there's a very good quote there, that this is about mentality and culture of different nations, and this is how the church traditions are shaped and how local churches grow. So locality is a qualitative characteristic of the church, which has its own subparts and traditions, like the theological, canonical, liturgical one, and not a territorial one. And therefore, in the Eastern Catholic theology, in particular in ours, we consider locality as a quality characteristic, and therefore the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is a global church which has eparchies around the world, and stresses that it's important for us to have personal jurisdiction and not territorial jurisdiction.
There is a very important discussion to be held here in Ukraine, how to understand this particularity, this locality, and what is our particularity. Or maybe it is something which is common to us, to Orthodox and to Greek Catholic. We have the same theological tradition canonically in terms of liturgy. Yes, so probably that will be the summary. Thank you for very important points mentioned in the analysis of this document. I don't know if we have time left for the discussion, for the Q&A session, so probably these will be some open questions. And yeah, so let's have one question from the audience. Father Ihor, one question, please. Anatoly had two provocative questions for other speakers, and I also have a provocative question to some extent. I think it would be of interest to all of us, as we have been talking about Eastern Catholic churches, about particularity, about traditions being connected, especially nowadays, that there is something common for this or that tradition. Greek Catholic Church has a cardinal. Is that the tradition for Eastern Catholic churches? And what about Orthodox churches and the way they take it? Yes, I could respond in the same provocative manner, of course, because in the Latin Church, cardinals very often, these are archbishops of the capitals, and without that was a regular member of synod who became a cardinal. And even in our synod, we have a cardinal as well. Yes. I think that we do not have a clear answer to this question. There is no solution. I have never seen a direct quote, but I think there was somewhere that Pope Francis, after his appointment, mentioned that most of them will not be cardinals. And you know from history that when Melkite, who refused to have to be a cardinal, and the Pope asked him to do that. However, for him to participate in the conclave, if it happened, of course, I'm not sure whether Maximus participated in the conclave. However, the question is still open to this day. And there were different proposals, maybe for patriarchs and senior archbishops to participate in the conclave without being cardinals, but then we need to change the canonical law of the Latin Church, which defines the Pope as the Bishop of Rome, because primarily he is the head of the Roman diocese and the Bishop of Rome. This is not an easy question to answer. That is why whether the head of the Eastern Church should be a cardinal, many of our theologians would say that this is a humiliation, because, well, that could be somebody who is not from clergy, not a cleric, and yes. And the head of the Eastern Church is the head of the Eastern Church. He is heading over the synod, the entire church. That is why I don't think that this should necessarily be an automatic process. That is why I do not see it as the problem. We have another voice in the Universal Church, the voice of the Cardinal, and as John Paul II mentioned that before he became the secretary, he couldn't open any doors in the Vatican. That is why it is important to have a certain position. Father Ivan, a short question, a short comment. If to speak about cardinals, this is the structure of the Roman Church. We have 7 cardinals, bishops, ex-nomers, presbyterians, and we have also cardinals who are deacons. So this is the Roman title of the Roman Church. In the 2nd millennium, when Gregory the Seventh, Innocentius the Third, they had the proposal for the cardinals to select the Bishop of Rome, which is logical. We have metropolises and the clergy, and we have the deanery of Rome, who select their bishop. So they have the distinction between the Bishop of Rome and Summus Pontifex, the senior. So it happens rarely that cardinals select bishops. The Patriarch Maxim IV didn't live up to the conclave. Maximus V didn't accept the cardinal, his beatitude. Sviatoslav accepted in the spirit of Cesar Levitsky and Simartovich. And then Lubachevsky and Husar also accepted it. I do not rule it out. Maybe Father Ihor knows more about his beatitude, Sviatoslav, saying that I don't want to also to be one. I am the head of the local Ukrainian church, my church. I don't know whether his beatitude said these words, because I was surprised, but there were also cardinals from laymen, not the clergy. Ottonelli, who was just a regular person, and then with John the 23rd, he made everyone to become archbishops. Yes, I think that, yes, that could be another hour of discussion. Thank you for clarification, Father Ivan. I would like to express gratitude to our panelists, to all those who listened to us and participated. We will have concluding remarks from Father Fijas, who is going to provide the summary of the entire Ecumenical Social Week. Glory to Jesus Christ. I would like to express gratitude to all those of you who stayed with us till the very end. Thank you for these 4 very active, intense days, during which we had extremely interesting discussions on the framework of the 17th International Forum, where we spoke about community resilience, the path towards healing and recovery. Right from the start, we could see this resilience, which is so much needed for Ukrainian people. Resilience of community is really something which consists of very many communities which nurture this universal resilience. That is why the need to have a very close look at these communities, at them surviving, developing, growing, how creative they are in terms of solution of those many challenges they have been facing. It really gives us a lot of strength and a lot of inspiration to continue growing, to continue supporting each other, to have this networking, really to be able to withstand these difficult times and to be ready to deal with the challenges of war and traumas of war, because of course people heal primarily in those small communities that they turn to. Taras Kurylets today has already mentioned what we had during the first working panel, when we realized that there are way too more questions than answers. It is another confirmation of the fact that this topic is extremely relevant and to the point. We will have many other seminars and conferences which will be more narrowly focused on the topic of community resilience. First of all, I would like to express gratitude to our friends from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, Katarina Bieltsarkovets, Jan Philipp Wolbern, who were present during the first 2 days of the week. They participated in all discussions and on the panel session. Thank you, Marina Tudalashvili, the head of the foundation, Thomas Billinger, for long-standing support. Gratitude to Akada, Martin Ehlert, our very good friend who roots for Ukraine, and he will also be in the Universal Council of Churches. He'll be represented, also his colleague Yana Gui, for all the support and for thinking about us. Renovabis, CNEWA, our French Catholics, L'Ouvre, these are all partners of the event. During this week, we had 13 roundtable meetings, and all of these meetings, all the discussions are recorded. They are in Ukrainian and in English. So for those of you who missed some of the parts or you would like to listen to it again, these discussions which took place, you are cordially invited to go to the website of the Institute of Ecumenical Studies, and there you will find YouTube recordings. There are also updates. Probably I will not mention all the roundtable meetings. However, it was about a community-oriented approach, a community of facilitators, a community of soldiers returning, hosting communities, church communities, their activities related to healing from war traumas. These are very important topics which we have been reflecting on. Our panel discussions wouldn't be successful without your participation. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude for all our participants, those who are present here. We had 50 and more participants who attended our events in the Ukrainian Catholic University, in the National Polytechnic University of the city of Lviv. I would like to express gratitude to all those people who came from different parts of Ukraine, Dnipro, Lutsk, Uzhhorod, Kharkiv, Kyiv, and many other cities of Ukraine. Our deep gratitude goes to you. Also, I would like to express my gratitude to online participants, those who had their questions. It means a lot to us. I would like to say thank you to the Institute for Ecumenical Studies for the organization of the event, and it is a pleasure for me to work for the Institute. Thank you. I would like to express gratitude to Irina Kitura, who actually lives and prays for the entire year for this event to be successful. We also organize more roundtable meetings. They will be dedicated to the next topic of the Ecumenical Social Week. I would like to express gratitude to Father Ivan Datsko, who is far away, but he is a very active participant of all our meetings. Our thanks go to you also, Halina Buchonko, Olga Koman, Taras Kurylets, Eduard Barnik, Irina Rogovska, Yuri Skira, Irina Kitura once again, for a very good organization of the Ecumenical Social Week, for your hard work. I would like to express gratitude to our media partners, Marta Bilska, who is the head of our press service. She's been helping us during this week. Her team, Maria Orenchak, Natalia Baida-Lichnovska, Olesa Kosik Pastushchak, Irina Berezovska, Christina Yakovin, and Demian Mihalik. I'm also thankful to our photographer who was here with us, not only in the university, but only when we had on site visits to the Unbroken Rehabilitation Center, the Bosco Center. She took really great pictures. You can see more of them on the page of our website. I'm also grateful to our interpreters for their hard work, to Yulia and Alexandra, who were trying to catch the vibe of these energies and to render all the information to those who are listening to us online as well. We are grateful our tech team, Oleg, Yuri, Andrei, Media Lviv team, and our volunteers, the students of the Ukrainian Catholic University, Sofia, Solomia, Marta, Snizhana, Anastasia, Anna, and Natalia. Yeah, so I think that with these words, I'm going to round up this event. That was the 17th Ecumenical Social Week, an international forum dedicated to the topic of community resilience, and we are going to finish with the words of prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The prayer is being said. Thank you, everyone.